Thank you so much. So, like a retired teacher, I have this highly organized, and what we'll be talking about today, I do want to tell you about Roland's biography and his background, and I have some visuals that will help you understand how he was shaped through the years. We're definitely going to talk about some of the artists he interacted with, about some of his mentors and peers. We will see his work over time, and of course when you have think about this for a minute, an 8-decade-long artistic career, it's quite a bit of development. And then we'll talk about his recent works and what he's been up to lately. The first thing they tell you when you become a teacher is don't put too much text in your PowerPoint. So I violated that rule for one slide only because it keeps me on track. Don't worry, it's paintings after this. But Roland was born on a very, very long honeymoon. He's Danish-American, but he was born in Denmark in March of 26. And his parents took more than 2 years for their honeymoon and then did return to the Bay Area. And that's where Roland was educated, went to high school. Because of his age, in fact, he was born the same year as my dad. My dad had the same situation. The war in the Pacific was winding down, but he did join the U.S. Navy. He didn't see overseas service. He entered cadet training, did some studies both at Princeton and then back here in California at College of the Pacific. And that brought him into the UC system, completing his BA at Berkeley and his MA in 1950. And I think those of you that follow art probably know that the Bay Area was just afire with artistic development and creativity after the war. All the schools were full of GIs with GI Bill benefits, going back to school, getting training in art. At Berkeley, Roland landed in I'm going to say, a group of Hans Hofmannites. There was a lot of interest in the French artist Cézanne, a lot of friends of the artist Hans Hofmann, and Glenn Wessels, his professor at Berkeley, steered him later to studying with Hans Hofmann. So when he completed the MA, he was newly married, and he went to Europe with his new wife and studied with William Stanley Hayter, who was a pioneer of etching. And then he also, when he returned to the US, he was in Provincetown and took some months of study with Hans Hofmann. You know, one of the things you'll notice about this slide, the studies just continued. He was, studying art for a long period. Even after Hans Hofmann, he went to the San Francisco Art Institute, and the person that got his interest there was Minor White, the photographer, made an impact on him. First one-man show was at the Oakland Museum, so that is 71 years ago in 1953 when I was -4. He had his first one-person show. People were saying, how deep is Roland's career? That's how deep his career is. He taught in Pullman, Washington, and then in 1956, he became the second studio faculty member at UC Davis. So just a few visuals to help you think about his influences. When you look at that etching by Stanley William Hayter, you can see the kind of modernism he was practicing, where there's an emphasis on line and curve and overlap. And I should also mention that while Petersen studied with Hayter, the Spanish artist Joan Miró was also in the studio, and Petersen had direct contact with him. So a real wonderful exposure to some leading European modernists after the war. And there's an etching that Roland did in 1951, where you can see what he did and didn't have in common with Hayter. And if you look hard, yes, there is a kind of a Guernica-style bull leaning in from the left side. So can we say 10% Picasso? Right? I want to say something about Chura Obata. Obata was a man that he had been a professor at Berkeley before the war. He was interned, and the chancellor of Berkeley personally took care of Obata's artwork, so he did not lose it. But after the war, he was humbled by the internment. He'd been teaching art at Tanforan Internment Center, which was a racetrack that later became a shopping mall. And when he returned, he was at Berkeley a few more years. And Roland is, I think, the only living student of Obata that I've ever met. And he says that Obata's brush painting demonstrations were mesmerizing. He really liked washing the Asian-style brush and said he couldn't take his eyes off Obata's hands when he was painting. So there's another wonderful influence. Hans Hofmann was the most famous European art teacher working in the United States. And he had been here in the 30s. He was back in the 50s. He had a setup in Provincetown. If you'd like to see more Hans Hofmann, I have to put this out there. BAMFA, the Berkeley Museum of Art and Film, has about 100 works of Hans Hofmann that he donated to what was originally the Berkeley Museum. So when you're in the Bay Area, you can immerse yourself in Hofmann. But there he is teaching after the war, and one of his sketches, we'll say more about him in a bit. Minor White, I have a quote from Roland, what can a painter take from a photographer? And Roland says, he made me more aware of seeing what's in nature that would have other meanings than the literal objectivity of the object. And of course, that's very, very articulate, but maybe to boil that down a little bit further, he realized that straight realism, objective looking, could still have meaning, could still have feeling attached to it. So I was saying earlier to Mark that the UC Davis art faculty was just extraordinary. That's a little photo collage from 1971. I said they were the New York Yankees of UC schools. And I bet a lot of you know, I bet a lot of your UC graduates, but in the 50s and 60s, the UCs all grew tremendously in size and funding because we were competing with Sputnik, was one reason. But the art department put together at Davis, take a look at that. Roland Petersen, Wayne Thiebaud, and Roland, by the way, you can see top 40 years, Thiebaud kept teaching as a volunteer well into his late 80s. The painter William T. Wiley, the ceramicist Bob Arneson, Davis was known for their ceramics. Manuel Neri, the sculptor, Roy DeForest, the painter. I mean, what a peer group to be part of. And they were all strong individuals who all found their own way as painters. So just want to say a little bit more about his development a la Hofmann. Take a look at a 1950 painting by Roland Petersen. And do you already see the man whose paintings are around this room? For me, a little bit, because the interest in color and the sense of dividing things up is already there. But compare it to Hans Hofmann. And Hofmann, as some of you may know, was trying to solve one of the big problems of modern painting. And that is, what do you do with flat color? And what do you do if you don't have carefully shaded form? And he had a theory that he espoused all across the United States to a generation of students. It was called push and pull. And I'll be pedantic for a moment. I'll read it to you. Push and pull, he said, are expanding and contracting forces which are activated by carriers in visual motion. Planes are the most important carriers, lines and points less so. I'm stopping on the word planes for a minute to let that sink in. The picture plane reacts automatically in opposite direction to the stimulus received. Thus, action continues as long as it receives stimulus in the creative process. Push answers with pull and pull and push. I really wish I could have read that in a German accent to make it even more like Hofmann. But this was a theory that influenced so many modern paintings. So in 1957, there is an early Petersen painting that, I'm going to say it, looks like he really was thinking about Hans Hofmann and planes and making some go forward and some go back into a field. But at Davis, a different kind of development was happening. And you've certainly heard about Bay Area Figuration. And the short version of Bay Area Figuration was that in the mid-50s, a very brave man named David Park took all his abstract paintings to the dump because everybody was doing abstract paintings. And he said, I have to tell stories. And he began a resurgence of representational or figurative painting. Bay Area Figurative, it's a little separate from and different from what was happening at Davis. I think if Roland was here and you said, are you Bay Area Figurative? He would say something along the lines of, well, they were down south, or they were artistic cousins, or almost. There's a connection to that. But Roland was beginning to make representational paintings, including some landscape paintings, in which you can already see his full palette approach to color developing. And to give you an idea, what did a David Park painting look like? You can look over his shoulder, or you can take a look at that head that he did in 1959. And Park died of bone cancer in 1960, just as he was beginning to have commercial success, but he left a tremendous impact on painters all through California. So there is a Roland Petersen from 1960. Big, broad strokes with, you guessed it, maybe cheap brushes from the hardware store. And if you take a look at the work of Paul Warner, I think that's from 1958, Figures in a Landscape, you can see the intersections of these painters in Northern California. Big brushes are in, almost abstract approaches to planes and to forms and to shape are in, deep shadows are part of the style, and I think this is maybe one of the last destinations before Roland Petersen really became his own artist. Everything that I've shown you so far, you see him making his way through influences. At UC Davis, I've got to ask, any Davis graduates here? Okay, I'm not, so I'm speaking for them. Since 1909, they have had something at Davis called Picnic Day. And it's a faculty event. It now includes a parade. It is a big, popular event that brings in all the alums and people of Davis and all of that, graduates. So this painting, Lunchtime, it looks a little bit like a David Park in its brushiness. But you see his other paintings from that era, and he has found a subject matter. And his subject matter is the picnic. And think about what the picnic offers, besides being something we all enjoy. It brings the figure and the landscape together. It brings opportunities to work with light and color, and an interest in post-impressionism is showing up here. It's something that he could bring to a large scale, and that's why I have this, with the woman looking on, because it tells you, that's a big, maybe 6-foot square painting, where he can move his arm all across the surface of that canvas, get some energy into it, and that's what it looks like up close. Absolutely fearless with those, I'm thinking the Bay Area, probably those Dana colors that you bought in the can. That when people used to paint houses, with oil colors you'd get in a can, but even now with the oil all dried out, fantastic imposter surfaces. So you really feel the artist's effort to make the painting as well as the image. Were there other artists who were maybe in this same zone with him? Well, absolutely. And I think that he and Wayne Thiebaud were always great friends, maybe even frenemies, because there's a little bit of competition. And in Thiebaud's, pies and cakes, which he says go back to the Mormon family picnics of his childhood, I think he's got some overlap with Roland Petersen. But again, they each had their own way of doing it. Thiebaud is a little bit more coming from commercial art and coming from illustration. And this is where you really begin to get the prime of early Roland Petersen. You get A Picnic, Girl with a Bouquet, from 1964. And as you take that in, you're going to notice a figure that is rather still, in profile, silhouetted against the background. It's broken into bands and zones of color, a la Hans Hofmann. And I want to put one more ingredient out there for you. Egyptian art. Davis, he really, really responds to Egyptian art, to that feeling of, design and simplicity and seriousness. And when you look at the profile of the Egyptian relief, which is Cleopatra, by the way, and the woman posing for this picnic, you see another intersection in Roland's art. Another influence worth mentioning, and I know some of you, good art history students were thinking this earlier, absolutely. He loved the paintings of Seurat. And you probably know that Seurat, when you look close, we would call it pointillism. It's made of many tiny, tiny dots of carefully, scientifically adjusted and mixed color, almost like a screen, almost like Seurat was predicting how color would be mixed in the future. And definitely, there's something that Petersen took from those paintings. And now we just get to enjoy, because Roland Petersen is really moving forward. And I think it's fair to say that by 1965, his paintings have everything that he needs to work with, everything that he needs to get into 2024 and beyond. I think 2025 should be a good year for his paintings. Geometry, color, atmosphere, brushwork, texture, you name it. One thing that interested me as I began to look at his multi-figure paintings, in other words, when you get more than one figure and you get groups, you get interactions, you don't often see a Petersen painting where people are directly engaged with each other. They more tend to have their own space, as if they are individuals. And I've just got to point out, if you look to my right, look at the two people at the round table. They look away from each other. That's kind of a Petersen subject. And he will talk about this. He says, when I'm working with a figure in space, and it doesn't seem to have an aura of loneliness or her own space, I often try to introduce a second figure into play. Because individuality, and maybe even a hint of loneliness or melancholy, seasons some of the big figure paintings. And you see it here in this untitled painting from 1967, a big horizontal composition that spreads out from the horizon with, how do you like that? Red outline on the plowed fields in the background, an umbrella dividing it. And look at some of the devices he's using that he continues to use. Checkerboards, umbrellas with ribs, plowed fields, tablecloths, fabrics, goes on and on and on. Stripes is another device he really likes. All these devices that pattern the paintings add to the visual rhythm. And only Roland Petersen could give you a title like that. 73 checkers in a blue shadow. Both a striped tablecloth and a checkered tablecloth. These paintings are in a certain way, they're very, very orderly, right? I mean, a man who paints checkerboards and stripes, that's an orderly mind, that's a Cartesian mind. But then there's a lot of freedom within that. For example, the woman turning away from us, she has a green neck. If you're a painter, try that at home. Try a woman with a green neck and see what your friends say when they come to see your painting. The trees are simplified to give you abstract forms. The horizon turns into stripes that take us deep into the composition. In the 70s, a lot of painting in New York was heading towards what you and I might call hard edge. Painters were starting to use rulers. Here in California, Richard Diebenkorn was using straight edges when he made his Ocean Park paintings. And a friend of mine who knew him said that they used to really kid him about the aluminum straight edges in his studio. No real painter uses an aluminum straight edge. He'd go to the hardware store and get them. And Roland follows along. Here on the other side of the rainbow, you can see he's used a compass and a straight edge. He's laying it out and he's letting the paint get a little bit tighter. He's also making some paintings, and we have an example here, right next to the screen, of these kind of puzzle piece cloisonné paintings, where he simply gives us a hard edge, he gives us a perspectival grid sometimes, and then flowing organic, I'll use a made-up adjective here, Matisse shapes, right? Matisse blobs is what I'm seeing here, clouds to water, and also maybe a feeling of something that you would see in the sky, maybe from flight. And even some paintings that are a little bit cosmic. This one is in the Monterey Museum. It's Beyond, with a kind of an intersection of, what would you say, a telescope and tie-dye. So I have a friend named David Newman that studied with Roland in 1976, loved him as a teacher, and he still has some photographs he took during class. And take a look at Roland, 1976, he's got a lab coat. His hair is perfectly coiffed, and he's got his index cards with his notes for teaching. So he is like a Hans Hofmann. He is a true professor who's highly organized. For contrast, I put up a picture from the similar year of Robert Arneson that you see there. That's the black and white photo of the ceramicist. And there is the guy who has what? Long hair in the back, a striped shirt like a Muppet, and overalls, working on his clay. So you see the contrast in some of the great personalities that we're teaching at UC Davis. Bob Arneson. Into the 80s, I got to say, that is one fantastic composition. Look how many compositional forces and directions and colors there are that take us all the way into the center. And in the center, you find a woman in an orange bikini. And, such a fantastic juxtaposition of geometry and organic form. And maybe hints of sails, in big red sails, like the sails of a sailboat. We don't know if we're seeing through them or if we're imagining them. But Roland is very, very inventive in the way he divides up his compositions. A bather from 1995 with a blue face and a yellow nose and a yellow cloud. They say that as you age, you get a little bit looser. That's maybe happening for me. I can't quite tell. I'd have to ask Linda. But, I feel Roland loosening up in the color. Naples yellow in the torso. But that is a really bold, bold painting. Viridian shadows on an orange body. He did some interiors. I think by about this time he was living in San Francisco, but also had a studio in Pacifica. He's retired from teaching. He's moving around a little bit more. And look just at the window, with the window panes. I think he's got a little homage to Richard Diebenkorn going on there in the window pane. A little, kind of a high-key Ocean Park painting, but of course his checkerboard is still there. And signs of the good life. Wine glasses, wine bottles, plate and foods, they're a big part of Roland's work. And I should tell you that what he and his wife Carol love to do as often as they can is they like to take cruises. They love the hot tub, they love the buffets, they love the good life. And it started to show, the happy retirement is starting to show in the paintings. A Picnic from 2010. Look how well he makes you believe in the deep space of that painting. One table after another, like a grid, receding in orderly fashion towards the plowed fields in the background. But what the heck is going on with those mountains? You tell me, right? Red, violet, blue, yellow, lime green. I don't know. Man and Three Women, A Picnic from 2015. So let me think about it. With Roland being born in 1926, so he was a spry 89 when he made that. And if anything, his painting is becoming more joyful and more intense. A favorite subject recently has been swimming pools. And I have a special thing to tell you about his swimming pools in a moment. But in this one, take a look at the reflections. A red dog running towards a woman in a lime coverall, and you can see the whole thing reflected in the pool, and you get a bonus. Because when you look at the top of the painting, you don't see the top of the palm tree in the composition, but you get it in the reflections, and you get some reflections, you get some women on the other side. What a fantastic time he had playing with that composition, deciding how to frame it and how to create energy around the edges of the painting. That is really a masterpiece of composition. There's Roland in 2017. I got to meet him around this time. It's a photo I took at the studio shop in Burlingame. And the first time I was able to interview him, and he had so much to say. You can see from his hands that he speaks with his hands, no longer holds the 3x5 cards. Photos that Carol took a couple of years ago. This is his studio, and I think the sink kind of says it all. Have you ever seen that little slogan? A clean desk is a sign of a sick mind. Well, he doesn't have a clean sink. All of the, everything left over from cleaning the brushes and from painting, it's all there at the sink, and you can see his stack of acrylic paints there on the rolling table. Painting in a Ralph Lauren robe. He likes to get up very early in the morning. He's a morning person. Maybe painting at 7 a.m., putting on the robe and going. Swingers from 2020. Multiple figures, all on the theme of swinging. And of course, to complicate it in a Petersen way, they wear stripes as they swing in front of stripes, in and out of shadow. And this is the thing I wanted to tell you about Roland's pool paintings. He is a hoarder. He hoards magnesium blue. And that is the original color that swimming pools have been painted since the 60s and 70s, but it's now illegal because it has some toxic qualities. But he stockpiled before they stopped making it. So I think he probably can go to 108, no problem, and keep painting swimming pools with his, magnesium blue. Multicolored couch from 2021. Reflections, stripes, formations, ovals, and that horizon always beckoning deep in the painting. You can see he's thought a lot about what Hans Hofmann had to say about pushing and pulling your eyes in and out of the painting. But he always finds a way to take you towards the horizon at the back. A Picnic with 4 umbrellas. Take a look. You know what I really enjoy is the foreground of this painting. It looks like some kind of a crazy rug that you buy at IKEA, right? Blue, yellow, pink, and violet. Carnations in a Vase from 2021 with an oval-shaped red flame of a tree in the upper right. There are some delightful small touches in this painting, and I think you can see a sliced watermelon, an open soft drink can, a pineapple, a vase with no flower, a folded umbrella with every rib a different stripe, and a lot of American flags appear in Roland's recent paintings, both as flags themselves and sometimes even reflected in the tablecloths. So there is Roland painting at the end of the day, and I think Sandy can give you a better report than I can because she has visited recently, but after a fractured hip, he's on the mend, and his wife Carol has come up with a contraption that lets him stand and paint. He's back painting again. As you can imagine, he's not happy if he can't paint. And now in his 98th year, he continues forward as a painter. That's 8 decades of Roland Petersen, the visual feast of his work. Thank you very much.